I'm Indy Nidell, and this is another exciting episode of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer all of your questions about the First World War. Nicholas Peterson writes, having come across a few articles about Allied tanks in German possession, I often wonder if the German Empire trained units to disable Allied tanks rather than destroy. Or was the capture of these tanks completely by chance? Or did the German army field tank hunter units or even squads late in the war? The Germans were far slower at recognizing the potential of the tank, but they were compelled to invent new ways to stop them. Ludendorff persistently dismissed the effectiveness of the tank, and he insisted, even after the war, in his post-war memoirs, that the best arms against tanks are solid nerves, discipline, and pluck. The German High Command gave special training to artillery crews to disable enemy tanks. They were instructed to develop support points made up of 1 or 2 field guns, and they would direct short-range barrages upon the incoming tanks. In addition to this, they would dig inaccessible ditches, camouflage craters, and minefields with extra buried mortar shells for good measure. Later on in the war, in 1918, the Germans developed an anti-tank rifle, which required 2 people to operate it, right? One was the gunner, and the other was an ammunition bearer. But both were actually trained to fire the weapon in the event that one of them was killed. Flackfire writes, how did they detect enemy aircraft prior to radar? That's a good question. Detecting enemy aircraft was a very makeshift process during the Great War. Troops were issued with long-range listening devices, which were basically big acoustic horns attached to a stethoscope. The monitor would then have to listen out for the sound of an airplane engine, although it was nearly impossible to pinpoint its exact location. Large, concrete acoustic mirrors were built around the coast of England in order to increase the range the person could hear incoming aircraft across the channel. Still, it was quite common that pilots stationed at the mouth of the Thames, they would see Zeppelins flying overhead before they'd even been notified at all. And often, to be honest, pilots would just fly sorties over enemy lines, hoping they would come across an enemy aircraft that they could destroy. Neil Stultz writes, I know night vision did not come about until World War II, but were there any early attempts at night vision, and what were the basics of nighttime warfare? Night fighting was very basic during the Great War, but did improve with new technology. Tracer bullets were invented during the First World War to combat Zeppelin bombing raids over England, over Britain. Not only did they ignite the hydrogen in the Zeppelin itself, but they also helped pilots to adjust their aim. Many pilots, they spoke of flying right alongside enormous German Zeppelins on very dark nights and still not being able to see them. Illumination rounds were extensively used in battle too. These were star shells, which we've mentioned before. They were made of magnesium and they were fired from howitzers, and they'd light up in midair and they'd descend slowly with a small parachute. And they would light up enemy positions and spot things like raiding parties in no man's land. The modern red dot sight used in nighttime combat was actually invented before the First World War, although it was only used in a limited capacity during the war itself. It was conceived by an Irish inventor, Howard Grubb, in 1900, and was designed to eventually replace the clumsier and more difficult to aim iron sights, so that even a poor shot could fire a weapon with great accuracy. It was a curved mirror with a luminous red dot in the center. This technology, however, was only used in 1918 by some German aircraft. The slightly more common nighttime gun sight of the First World War was used by the British, which consisted of a small brushstroke of luminous radium paint on the sight, and this was actually radioactive. Max Silva writes, did any of the allies of Germany send troops to help the Germans on the Western Front? Austria-Hungary sent troops to the Western Front, but this was a limited amount. The Austrians sent 4 batteries of artillery to assist the Germans in Belgium in 1914, at the beginning. They served in the battles of Namur, Antwerp, and the First Battle of Ypres before being sent to the Eastern Front. A small force of Austro-Hungarians returned to the Western Front at the end of 1918 and suffered badly during the Meuse-Argonne offensive at the hands of the American army. The Bulgarians refused to send troops to fight in support of the Germans on other fronts. They argued, since they fought for their homeland, they couldn't justify sending their troops against enemies that didn't concern them. If you'd like to see how the Battle of Antwerp turned out, you can click right here for that episode. Do not forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. See you next time.